So if we go back to our directions, step 1 says to cut out the gray pieces and arrange them to show more than one plausible path that a carbon molecule takes in an ecosystem. Your path must start with carbon in the atmosphere and trace the transformations of carbon through at least 2 organisms to end with carbon returning in the environment. We've talked about so far that a cycle is a circle shape, and with 3 pieces, we're going to end up with something that looks more of a triangle for our cycle. We know that plants and animals are both organisms, and that we have to start with the atmosphere. I know it's going to have to go atmosphere, plant, animal, because the animal needs the stuff that the plant makes. It can't really go atmosphere, animal, plant, because then the animal wouldn't have the glucose it needs. Step 1, done. Next to each step in the carbon's path, place a striped piece that happens at that step. Be sure to include the blank organelle pieces next to the correct process. So I know that photosynthesis happens in plants and that photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast, and that those 2 things kind of go together. I know that animals do cellular respiration, and that respiration happens in the mitochondria. So those things go together. And with my leaf cut out, I know that the plant leaf has a mitochondria and therefore also does cellular respiration. And it still happens in the mitochondria in a plant. I've got my striped process pieces and my blank organelle pieces. Step 2 is done. It says I have extras. I already threw away my extras. Step 3 says pick one process piece to begin with. Place the polka dotted inputs and outputs pieces where they belong. Use arrows to show if the polka dot piece is an input or an output, and do the same thing for the other striped pieces. So I'm going to start with photosynthesis because I know the most about photosynthesis because we've been learning about it since like 5th grade. I know that light is an input to photosynthesis, that carbon dioxide is an input to photosynthesis, and that water is an input to photosynthesis. I know that photosynthesis makes oxygen and glucose, and that we use the glucose as chemical energy. In order to get my inputs and outputs correct to show the purpose, right? The purpose at the top says discover how photosynthesis and respiration are related to the carbon cycle. I need to show how these 3 pieces work together. So I know that the light comes from the sun, and that input arrows point to the direction that they are going. So my light comes from the sun and into photosynthesis. I know that carbon dioxide comes from our atmosphere, and that it is an input because my arrow is pointing in to photosynthesis. Water is my last input, and I know that plants get their water from the rain and they suck it up through their roots. So my water belongs in the roots and is an input. So in step 3, I picked one process and I put my polka dotted pieces around it, and now I'm tracking where it actually goes. I know that photosynthesis makes oxygen, and that I know that the oxygen goes back to the atmosphere. Outputs are going to, again, we're pointing to where it goes, and the photosynthesis is outputting, so we draw an arrow out to the oxygen, and the oxygen goes back to the atmosphere. I know that photosynthesis also makes glucose, and we use it as chemical energy. So I've done the first 2 sentences in step 3. It says now to repeat the process for each one of my striped process pieces. So I have another striped process piece in cellular respiration, and I have another striped process piece in cellular respiration with the plant and the animal. I know that my inputs for cellular respiration are oxygen and glucose, which we use as chemical energy. And I know that cellular respiration outputs carbon dioxide, ATP, which is chemical energy, and water. I need to draw how these are all connected though. Right now I have my atmosphere and the plant connected, and the animal is just kind of doing cellular respiration all on its own. But where does the animal get its inputs for cellular respiration from? Well, I know oxygen is an input, and I know that the photosynthesis makes oxygen. So I take the oxygen back from the atmosphere that I just made, and it goes into cellular respiration. So now I don't need this piece because I've already have it modeled in my poster. My other input is glucose, which we use as chemical energy. But I look at my poster already, and I already noticed that I have glucose that was made from photosynthesis. So how does my animal get the glucose that it needs as an input? It's going to eat it. So we've now tracked carbon in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. It's getting turned into what other carbon-containing molecule? Remember, oxygen gas is just O2, and glucose is C6H12O6. So out of those two, I know that only my glucose is a carbon-containing molecule. So my carbon starts in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, gets changed into glucose through the process of photosynthesis, where then it goes into cellular respiration and gets changed into a different carbon-containing molecule. So from here, you need to finish your outputs of cellular respiration, and you need to figure out how the plant gets its inputs and outputs for cellular respiration. This should give you the ability to track how carbon starts in the atmosphere and ends up back in the atmosphere.